Welcome this evening to all of you sixth form members. This is an NEU Zoom specially for you this evening. I firstly want to start by saying thank you for joining us. My name is Amanda Martin and I'm the President of the National Education Union. And before we start this evening's webinar, I'm just going to go through some housekeeping. So firstly, just to let you know, this will be recorded and all of the information put in the chat and the questions saved. This is firstly so that we can show it to those that are not able to come on our YouTube channel, but also so that we can use the information and maybe the questions we don't get to help form the guidance that we put out to you across the time during this COVID-19. Secondly, in the chat box, there is an NEU behaviour code. Please adhere to that when you're asking questions or commenting in the box. And finally, we are in a webinar format, so you will only see the panelists and the people that are speaking. You won't get to see yourselves during this time, but we do want you to participate, and there are two ways that you can do that. One of them is, as so many of you are already, in the chat function by saying hellos and who you are, but also in that chat function, our brilliant tech team will put in links around the things that our panelists will be talking about, and we'll answer questions. So if you're having any troubles either hearing or you've got any questions in here around this webinar this evening, you can also put some questions in there and they will answer them for you. And the other way we want you to get involved is to use the Q&A button. So the Q&A button is where you can ask questions. If you put your name and where you're from, and then when we come to the point where the panelists have finished talking, then we will take some questions from the floor. Please try and leave some time for them to speak first before you ask questions, because they may well answer some of the things that you were going to say. I want to just say a big thank you to our tech team, who this evening are Jack, Dorothy, Craig, Henry and Mike. They will be assisting you in the chat, as I've said, and in the questions as we go through, and to our brilliant signer, Sam Riddle. This evening, we're going to hear from three members from the NEU. Firstly, one of them will be your sixth form college executive seat holder, and that is Jean Evanson. So Jean, over to you. Good evening. Someone unlock Jean, please. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I am now unlocked. Yeah. Good evening, everybody. So my name's Jean Evanson, and some of you know me, some of you don't. And I'm the National Executive Member for Post-16. So that includes sixth form colleges and FE colleges as well. And as well as being the executive member, I'm a rep in, I suppose, what would technically be called a tertiary college, but we are covered by the SFCA. And later on we'll get into the joint advice that's come through, which has been agreed, one set of advice been agreed with AOC and another set of advice been agreed with SFCA, and both very similar and very similar principles. And just as Amanda said, I'd like to send you all solidarity in these terrible and tough times, and I think they are terrible and tough for everybody. And I'm hoping that you and your families are well and coping with this situation. So first of all, I want to talk about the current situation, and the current situation in colleges. Now, this of course varies enormously from college to college, but having said that, there are many colleges where numbers going in this week have increased only slightly. So despite what the government said about 25% of year 12, a lot of colleges have listened actually to us, and I think that's really, really good, and have only increased numbers very slightly, and have looked at those not engaging in online learning in particular, and also looked at those who needed to complete practical assessments in order to complete a qualification. So for instance, in my college, they're looking at, it hasn't happened this week, but next week, people going in to complete things in welding, bricklaying and such, and plumbing, where it just can't be done virtually. However, there are some colleges that have brought in 25% of year 12. So we might get into later on some via questions looking at that. And that can potentially mean a lot of students on site, because when you consider that for a college is quite a significant proportion of the college students in comparison with a school that's going from year 7 to year 13. And I think reflects the fact that the government doesn't tend to think of FE in particular, and doesn't think of sixth form colleges when it's writing its policies. It thinks of probably mostly about the sorts of schools they went to. So we have a varied situation, I think, basically is what I'm saying. The best practice that's out there, the best practice in some colleges, and is in quite a lot of colleges, I'm pleased to say, is that the staffing of the current widening of opening has been voluntary, and anybody who's not comfortable with going in for any reason is not being asked to go in. Also, risk assessments. Risk assessments in many colleges have been done well in advance, and have been discussed with union reps, particularly if you've got a health and safety rep. And then people have gone in to do site visits and made recommendations. And there's been some absolutely excellent NEU training for health and safety reps. I have to say, you know, we are really proud of the NEU training on health and safety, as well as many other aspects of how the NEU has behaved through this crisis. And I'd like to thank those of you on this call who have participated as reps or as health and safety reps in checking through the risk assessments, using the checklist, and going back to management and saying, can we talk about all the various aspects. I mean, I've been in those conversations with my management as well, and you know, getting down to the real nitty gritty of what needs to be in place to make it as safe as possible in these times. So that's where we are at the moment. And part of where we are at the moment, of course, is online learning. And I think we have had some concerns about online learning and what's happening, and one of them is around safeguarding. And I think the issues around safeguarding and online learning are that in some colleges we were put in a position of hitting the ground running with having to learn how to deliver online, and some people went straight into teaching live lessons, and there's some real pitfalls around that. And I think we very much need some quality training, which I think has happened in some colleges but not others. So we need some training, we need some real understanding of what the risks involved are and how to operate. And I know we've got many members who are quite expert in this, and we can use our own. And I think as a union we should do that. We should form lots of information and fact sheets and guidance for people. But the guidance at the moment for the NEU says that everybody who takes part in that live lesson should only do it voluntarily, because you've got to be confident that you can do it. So that's a really good set of advice that we've got at the moment, and I think we need to build on that for September. In particular, though, I think safeguarding around one-to-one, I think we have to be really careful about. If, you know, one-to-one video calls are not advised at all, and that's something that I think is important to say. Accessibility with online learning for our students is particularly an issue. Some students don't have access to broadband, laptops, a quiet space to work. These are real issues for some of our students. In September, we expect, nobody's got a crystal ball, September's still quite a long way away, but we expect to be delivering through blended learning, basically some online, some face-to-face. So those safeguarding concerns really do need to be addressed before then. And we need to say what we need to make it work. And I think this comes into and I don't know how many of you have seen this, the route back from the 10 points that the NEU's produced. We need small classes for the face-to-face contact that's going to happen, and we need social distancing to be taken seriously. Health and safety has to remain paramount through all of this. We need some particular consideration for those students who've got special educational needs and disabilities. Black students, Black members of staff, all of that. We need staff and student anxieties to be taken seriously. We need more staff. And I think that's become very plain to me. We do need more staff. For example, if you are going to do one-to-ones, then you need a second member of staff on the call to make it safe. So, you know, there might be situations where that's really, really valuable and you need that. Training, we need training, as I've said. We need better technology in some colleges. One of the things we've got at our college is when you use Teams, if you do a meeting, you can't have a class of 24 on Teams doing a live lesson. We also need to address the curriculum. So the curriculum that we've got at the moment, we can't possibly deliver the rest of it, the content of it, in the time left. So that needs to be addressed. And I know there are conversations going on with Ofqual, but we need to know exactly what's being required of us and the students as soon as possible. And actually, we need a better curriculum going forward that actually stops putting students under this huge pressure of how much they've got to get through. We need to be able to develop other strategies to get through this, team teaching, etc. And we have to understand what students need, and students need better understanding. So in other words, they need to be understood and you know, the pressures that they've gone through, but they also need free broadband, laptops and printers, I would argue. And when we think about what happened this week with Marcus Rashford, and we think about the battle he had in getting free school meals and the fact that his high profile got that through, I think we have to pick up on that energy and say, actually, there are other things students need to help them in this crisis. We do need face-to-face teaching. There's no replication for that. We can't do it all online, and we don't want that to be seen as a substitute for teacher-led learning. There's no shortcut around education. And of course, if you do come down to just internet learning, it does favour the more affluent, and we don't want big businesses just to exploit this situation. And we don't want it to be seen as a way of saving money, as it has been seen in some areas of HE. So, as I said, we don't have a crystal ball, but there are clear signs we won't be out of this for a while, and we need to demand all these things from government. NEU policies updated all the time. Please keep checking the website. That's my other last piece of advice. But thank you all for listening, and I'll hopefully be able to answer your questions when you come back with them. Thank you.
Thank you, Jean, for a real whistle-stop tour of what's going on in the sector right now. And you're right, you know, there is no one fixed solution. There is no one situation the same. So looking at the advice and matching it to your place of work is exactly what we need to be doing. And Jean's right, she'll be back to answer some questions in a moment. But before that, I'm going to bring in one of the Assistant General Secretaries who is in charge of bargaining and negotiations, and that's Andrew Morris. Welcome, Andrew, this evening.
Thanks very much, Amanda, and good evening, everybody. I want to cover two items specifically and briefly, hopefully, but they may deal with some of the questions that people have in mind. The first is the NEU advice to members and reps in colleges. The DfE's advice for colleges is fairly limited, much more so than for primary schools in particular. But it does say clearly that opening from the 15th of June, not on the 15th of June, is focused on students in year 1 of 2-year courses, with remote learning to continue to be the main form of delivery, and with only 1/4 of the cohort in college at any one time. Over the last couple of days, of course, there's been some overexcitement, I think, on the part of ministers. More students are back, so we return to the question of how many more can we get back? So there's a lot of discussion around even wider opening in primary and secondary and in colleges, and getting students back in greater numbers. So specifically, the DfE's been advising that everybody should have the opportunity of a face-to-face in the colleges sector, or at least under 19s, before the end of term. The response that we've made to this sudden move towards more reopening in all sectors is how does this fit with existing planning? Because if schools have been planning for reopening from the 15th, colleges have been planning for reopening from the 15th for a limited cohort, and all their plans are intended to ensure safety for that cohort and for their teachers and support staff, why are we talking about something different all of a sudden? So it should only happen if it's safe. It should only happen if it can be accommodated within colleges planning for the rest of the college year, because there's not much time left now, and the focus really should be on getting ready for whatever level of opening there is at the start of the new college year. We published as NEU a checklist for schools jointly with the other education unions, which we took the lead in developing, and that's now been adopted almost unamended by AOC, with NEU and UCU and other unions' endorsement as a planning guide for colleges, which is really welcome because it recognises, I think the AOC has recognised the good sense in what we were saying. We want reps still to use the NEU and joint union checklist as the basis for assessing opening. And one reason for that is because we've supplied it to you in an app form, and you can complete it in app form, and the results get sent to us at union headquarters, as well as allowing you to print out a report in red, amber and green format for you to use in discussions at college. The fact of the AOC advice is important because it recognises the right to consultation. Members and representatives, including NEU representatives, should be involved. As Jean said, we've also got the joint statement with the SFCA for sixth form colleges, jointly with NEU, Unison and unusually the NASUWT, which also recognises and emphasises the right to consultation. Both of the statements recognise that the DFE wants social distancing to be maintained, and that should be part of the planning process. And both statements recognise that the unions will advise their members, you as members and reps, according to the individual situation in the college, not just the national priorities of government. The other bit of advice I wanted to flag up is the relatively recently published advice about those who are at risk, staff and their families, in relation to returning to the workplace. And it's been clear since the beginning of the coronavirus outbreak that some individuals are unfortunately at greater risk than others. And the past, all absolutely clear, confirmed. No, the tests of safety be set and satisfied both nationally and locally, and that the workplace needs to be safe for individuals as well as for workers generally. So hopefully you've seen and used the checklists on workplace safety for reopening. That's now accompanied by a checklist which considers specifically the risk and vulnerability to individual members of staff, whether they're in the defined vulnerable and clinically vulnerable groups or other higher risk groups. And we have got some supplementary advice specifically for Black members of staff as well. We're saying that they need individual risk assessments for every individual. Every individual's vulnerability needs to be assessed individually. Individuals are going to be affected not only by their health, but also by their age, sex, ethnicity, and other personal circumstances, and by the nature of their job. Some support staff will be at greater risk than teaching staff because of what they're required to do at the workplace. The workplace needs to be safe for them. So our message is, if you're concerned, tell your employer as an individual and tell them why you're concerned, and also make sure that your rep knows. Your employer will know your circumstances, will be prompted to consider them and know what they should consider because you will have told them. If you're clinically extremely vulnerable or clinically vulnerable, we say you should be working at home. And the same applies if you live with or care for someone in those categories as well. And we think that should be possible in all colleges. And others may need to work at home as well if their circumstances, particularly age and ethnicity, suggest that. In cases of disagreement, seek your GP's advice in the same way as you would if you were unwell, because the principle is to avoid you becoming unwell. Schools need to be safe for you personally, as well as for you and your colleagues collectively, and we will support you to help ensure that. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Andrew, for that. And I'm sure that as we've got some questions coming through, we will have some more on that. Before we take some questions, oh, hi, Norman, you're back. So I'm just going, Norman's having some internet difficulties. So before we move on to questions, I'm going to introduce Norman, who is the National Officer for Sixth Form FE colleges and basically covering your sector. So I'm going to bring Norman in. Thank you, Norman. Welcome this evening.
Amanda. I've had trouble with the technology, as I'm sure most of you had over the previous months. But I'm just really pleased that everybody's attending and contributing to the discussion. The last Zoom chat we had was absolutely fantastic and gave us a lot of ideas of going forward. So I'm currently all ears. So thank you, Amanda.
Thank you very much. Okay, so Norman will come in and support Jean and Andrew with regards to questions. And before I bring in the questions, I just wanted to touch on something or go into a bit more detail that Jean covered. So Jean mentioned the National Education Union's recovery plan for education, which she called it the 10-point plan, which is what we are calling it ourselves. And what I wanted to do is just to go over that, because although it's a 10-point recovery in education, and the National Education Union believes education is from nursery right the way through to higher education. So these 10 points are absolutely relevant for your sector, as well as they are relevant for secondary schools, primary and our nursery schools. And Jean touched on some things. I think it's really important that when we're thinking about the way forward for the sector, these things are the union are looking for. So it's around making sure disadvantaged kids are the first thing that's on the top of our list. It's around the second thing that Jean mentioned that we won yesterday on free school meals, and making sure that those most vulnerable and disadvantaged in our society aren't going hungry over the summer holidays. It's also linked to local authorities, and I know that many colleges will be used during summer holidays for holiday clubs, not necessarily, well, not you guys working, but actually the buildings will be being used, and that's what we're urging local authorities to do, to look at using buildings and working with local authorities to have holiday clubs for those people. Also, as we go forward, it's about the acquisition and the using of public buildings to extend learning, and that may well be particularly necessary in some of the more practical subjects that you would have in your colleges, making sure that there's room to do those subjects. Bringing in more qualified teachers, something I know that's absolutely been important within your sector, and making sure that we've got enough people in the system. And I know Jean talked around that. And one of the important things is the union have been working behind the scenes with Ofqual and with other exam bodies to make sure that when children and pupils are returning, they know what they're studying towards. So that's another one. Blended learning, Jean touched on, so I won't go into any more detail, but that's going to need some real thinking. And that absolutely links to the point before. When we know what the pupils are learning, that's when we need to think about our blended learning. And again, it's about poverty and children living in poverty, and what are the government doing for those families. And then we're also looking at a national wellbeing plan. And I know particularly in sixth form colleges, so many of you do it so well, the wellbeing system, probably much better than they do in the school sector. And it's about making sure that that is absolutely there and in place. So when we're thinking about the questions in the future, those are the kinds of areas that we are looking at in our 10-point plan. Okay, without further ado, I will go to some questions, and I've got quite a few. So Juliet, she is asking, please could you clarify what the safeguarding issue is with online learning specifically? So that's a specific one on online learning. I'm going to give 3 questions. And then James is asking, NEU Post-16 national group from Kent, he's from, which organisations are being consulted on with the new government guidance on further education? And then Duncan, can I ask what's likely to happen to staff who are shielding if the government ends the scheme at the end of July? Will staff be expected to return to work for the new term, even if medical advice is to continue? So those 3 to start with. Shall I come to you first, Jean?
Yeah, thanks, Amanda. Yeah, if I start with the safeguarding one, and I don't pretend to be any expert on this, I have to say, but having said that, and having gone through a bit with another colleague at work, one of the things is around video, and you should have control of an environment. When we're in a classroom, we've got a lot of understanding of the control of the classroom environment, but as soon as you have video on, you don't have control of what goes on in somebody else's house. And what you could have is a situation, if you've got the students all houses on display for each other, and something happens in one of those windows and the other students see that, it becomes an immediate safeguarding concern, and that has happened in certain circumstances. Also, even if you have the capacity to switch off a recording of a meeting, so for example on Teams you can set it up so that the students can't record it but you can, they can still record it with screen catching technology that I know very little about, but they tend to know quite a lot about it, particularly if they're into gaming. And then they could edit it, put all sorts of things on it, and then post it on YouTube. So we've got to be very aware of what the risks are and do things to mitigate those risks and get learning agreements in place with students so that they don't do that. So there's lots and lots of questions specifically about live streaming of lessons. With one-to-ones, there are all the normal concerns around when you have a conversation with a young person in a room on your own. But in addition to that, if you're having a conversation on Teams or something, you don't know who else is in the room when you're talking, and that becomes a real safeguarding concern in itself. So I think I've only scratched the surface on what safeguarding concerns are, but I think there are many others, but that needs to be looked into.
Thank you, Jean. Did you want to answer any of the others before I move on to Andrew?
No, I think there's probably better people to answer the others.
Brilliant, thank you, Jean. Andrew, shielding.
Yeah, so Matt Hancock announced today that in England there's going to be some announcement shortly on the shielding programme. And there has been some change in that people who've been told basically to stay indoors have been told that they can go out in very limited circumstances. I would be extraordinarily surprised if the advice changed to it's all right for you to go back to work. And even if it did, I think the union would be very, very firm in its advice that you should not be going back to work if you're in that category. The DfE advice with regard to the vulnerable but not clinically extremely vulnerable has not been helpful, because it has suggested that people may be able to go back to work if certain safeguards can be maintained in terms of social distancing within the workplace. We've taken the line that that's completely unrealistic, because you also have to get to and from the workplace, and particularly in some settings, maybe not quite so much in post-16, but certainly in early years and primary, it's very, very difficult to envisage social distancing being maintained. But our line applies in all sectors and for teachers and support staff alike. If you're clinically extremely vulnerable or vulnerable, or if you live with someone who is, you shouldn't be putting yourself at the risk of either getting the virus yourself with its potential consequences to you, or bringing that home to your family. And we will continue to hold that line. But I am doubtful that any broadening of the position of the shielding category would say anything more than you can go out more often, but still not very often.
Yeah, thank you very much. There is one question that James asked, and that was around which organisations are being consulted on the new government guidance on FE. Are you aware of that, Norman or Andrew or Jean?
I suppose the question is FE guidance. Is that a reference to the current possibility of FE reform? That there is legislation in the offing to restructure the sector quite radically, which we members need to be prepared for. And that, if that's the case, then perfectly happy to answer that question.
If you answer it as if it's that one, and then if not, then we'll see if James will come back and if we need a further follow-up, that would be brilliant. Thanks.
Yeah, okay, because there was a document called Planning Guidance, which was a joint union and AOC specific document on wider opening. So I'll leave that to one side for the moment. But in regards to the reforms, the government currently are planning it looks like a radical restructure of the sector. Some people have thought it has meant that the sector is going to be nationalised or brought back into local authority control. That may not be the case. It may be something that looks more regionally based, more extensive than we have now, but integrated. So they are looking at an integrated, collaborative system rather than one that is currently competitive based upon institutional competition. So that's to be welcomed. The question is what that model will be and how it will benefit members, and that's currently up for discussion. But it's certainly something that should be at the forefront of our minds going forward, because we're expecting that legislation to come in later on this year. I would like to just pick up also on the point about safeguarding, because this issue about safeguarding in regards to the pedagogy of online learning and blended learning gives us a chance to raise the issue of professional voice in regards to new pedagogies. The AOC and JISC, who are a charity-based company who support digital implementation in the further education sector and have worked with reports that have been done in the sector in regards to digital, are currently looking at how this is going to be planned long term. So again, my call is to members, obviously to Jean and the National Council, is to look at how we can really get a grip on what the professional view is on digital, on safeguarding, and how pedagogies can be used online for the benefit of learners.
Thank you very much, Norman. Okay, I've got some more questions for you. So Jack asks, it's not a COVID question. The SFCA agreed a 2-year pay deal with Unison recently. Thank you for negotiating the recent pay deal. Is there any chance of the 2.5% from January 2021 getting locked in, given the high chance of another round of austerity from the government? And then Sally has asked, any other FE staff being put under pressure to continue to work over the summer by assessing online learning, developing online learning courses from scratch, participating in marketing activities and further CPD to facilitate online learning competencies, rescheduling booked annual leave to accommodate management plans that change by the day. So it's basically a list of things are other people being asked. And I guess what would the union stance be on that? Robert has asked from Newham, the curriculum needs massive reform and COVID has exposed huge problems with the size and shape of the curriculum post-Gove reforms. Have the government made any statements or plans about going forward with the curriculum? And I'll give you those three just for the moment, and then I'll come back. Jean, I'll come to you first.
Yeah, I'll answer the question on pay. Well, I say I'll answer it, but I don't think I can really. It's an unknown, isn't it? That's the thing. It's unknown what will happen. What I'd have to say is that all the talk around a sort of second wave of austerity is completely unacceptable from the government. What they've shown through this crisis is actually, when we are in crisis, you can find that magic money tree and you can reorganize society around an idea that actually you need to support people in times like this. So the furlough scheme, for example, which they tried to abandon and then had to bring back, free school meals, which they tried to get out of giving over the summer and then had to morally had to say, well, yes, actually we will. And I noticed Neve's comment in the chat about the fact that it doesn't apply to our sector, and that's something we definitely need to campaign on, and the laptops as well, not applying to our sector. So in terms of our pay, if we have a sort of second wave of austerity, we have to reject that, absolutely, and I'm sure the union nationally will be doing that along with many other unions across many sectors, because it is the sectors of public sectors that have taken the brunt and have been the people working through this and have been supporting children, students through. And, it's totally wrong if their reaction to that is to say that we have to be paid less. And we have to say it's time that society recalibrated itself actually and looked at what is actually valuable and what people value in society, and refunded on that basis. So I can't promise that we're going to get a better pay rise than 2.5% in January, but we'll be fighting for one.
Thanks, Jean. Norman.
Well, I'd like to, I mean, obviously Jean can address the summer work issue, but I think that's absolutely crucial again, because we're at a really important juncture in regards to, you know, control over the curriculum and control over the work schedule going forward. Of course, there has to be some flexibility to support learners who've missed out on education, but you can't double up on staff time. You can't say, we've now got to prepare your classes and your schemes of work for online learning, and now we're also going to support in a different way, perhaps, learners through the summer, because there seems to be no question that social distancing and the logistics of that is really going to affect how support for learners is delivered. So again, this is another point at which, you know, members via the National Council and via Jean, please communicate with Jean on this issue, is how we then have a voice around our interest in supporting learners, but also in protecting staff in regards to heavy workload. We simply can't double up over the summer. So we really need to move towards a longer term recovery curriculum over the next year. That would be the most sensible thing to do, would be to plan a longer curriculum over the next year or even two, to ensure that learners can catch up and that lessons can be delivered clearly and effectively. That needs the voice of professionals to do that.
Thank you. And Andrew? I can hear you.
You can hear me. Okay. Okay. Now, I think what I was going to answer was a question on workload. Is that correct?
Yeah, it was around summer. We've been asked for people to come into summer, but I guess all of those things will also be coming into the summer term, will be the pressure on workload now to be preparing as well for September. So I think it is a workload question.
Yeah, I suppose the point that we've been trying to make in relation to this term is that while it's exceptional circumstances, the demands upon you shouldn't be exceptional and accepted by you. The planning that needs to happen in every college for delivery needs to be done in consultation with and agreed by staff and by their representatives, and representatives should be involved. So the work involved in splitting classes, the work involved in teaching online, the work involved in all the new forms of delivery that you've got, none of that should be seen as a bolt-on or an extra that you have to do in addition to the working time that you would have been working in previously. Contracts in the FE sector can be both vague and different from college to college, but nonetheless, everybody should start off with the fundamental starting point is, does this seem unreasonable? And if not, we will say so, and up with it we will not put, and say that collectively and through your rep.
Thank you, and thank you very much. And obviously, I think that we made it clear, but just to be specific, Rob asked, you know, have the government made any statement or plans about curriculum going forward? No, they haven't made any real statements at all. And that's why we are pushing to have those conversations, to make sure that if we're thinking about blended learning and developing those, we're developing them so that pupils know what their end game is, know what they need to get to and achieve. So no, but we are pushing. And I want to come back on what Jean said with regards to Neve's comment in there. It's very much like the sixth form sector is the poor relative of education all of the time. And if we go the other end, it's the nursery. You know, the free school meals don't apply, the laptops don't apply. And when you look at when they extended EHCP plans for up to 25-year-olds, there was no money that came with that. So we do need to keep pushing and making sure that we're securing the funding for those as well, because those pupils still also need it. Okay, some more questions for you. So Jane Barnett, it is another workload, but I think it's not quite been covered. So what is the union's position on the likely increase in workload created by splitting classes in half? So that, for example, instead of having 4 hours of face-to-face classes of 24 students, a teacher might be expected to teach 2 times 2 hour face-to-face classes and 2 hours online. Does teaching online count as contact time? Well, yes. And Duncan has asked, thinking of September, presumably we apply the 5 tests again in the medical circumstances, then we need to start from scratch with RAs, as the RAs has applies to the plan at the stage. How many students in, how often 2 metre distancing? So basically the 5 tests apply, but as things change, the risk assessment, where do we go with that? And I've got one that says we have the same 5 staff in every day for 12 weeks to provide open college services for SEND, ALS and vulnerable students. When will they get a break? We are exhausted. And a final one, Pippa has asked, has there been any indication from the government that they are willing to listen to our concerns regarding not only the size and shape of the curriculum, but also the content, i.e. decolonising? So I added that in because we've had one and I think it's just an additional one there. So I'll come to you again first, Jean, please.
Yeah, I'll start with the one about splitting classes, and yeah, you're absolutely right. This is a real threat, I think. When I've seen this, I've started to talk with this to our management, and you know, you've got to start saying now that we haven't got infinite time, and just because we've got the same number of students, in those circumstances, the circumstances will create extra workload, and we have to flag it up. So we have to flag it up as reps, those of us that are reps, and we have to say that we won't do it. Basically, it's still we still got an agreement on how much time we spend. If you're in a sixth form college, it's 1265 hours, and we can't just create extra time out of nowhere, and we will be completely exhausted. It's been hard this term as it is to support people purely online, but as soon as we get to blending, that's going to add extra workload, and therefore there needs to be some capacity around there. So that might be extra staffing, that might be reducing the number of classes people have, but obviously we've got to tell government that, because they've got to be funded, and that's going to be really, really crucial. So this is, I haven't got a solution, but I'm saying we will absolutely be fighting that fight. And I think we need to, at college level, you need to be saying, no, we can't do this. But also at a national level, we'll need to say to government, we need more funding to be going into colleges. On Duncan's question about 5 tests, I think that's a really, really important point. As I said earlier, we haven't got a crystal ball. We don't know what position we're going to be in September. You know, we hope that we're not going to be in the position of a second wave, although a lot of people think we will be, and whether we are in September or whether it's later than that or whatever, but we are going to need to assess the situation at every point. And with risk assessments, actually risk assessments should be updated regularly according to the circumstances. So we will, as a union, again, need to assess, should we be in a sort of blended learning situation or not, or should we be on online learning on its own? So all of that, I think, is very, very relevant. And I think the comment about the same staffing every day to support vulnerable students, because it tends to be in colleges that the same staff supporting them. I think that's a really important point, and we need people to be fighting specifically for those staff and saying they need a break. They absolutely do need a break.
Thank you. Thanks, Jean. Andrew?
Yeah, briefly on Duncan and Pippa's questions. I mean, Duncan's question about the 5 tests. We've said very clearly, as the science develops and knowledge grows, then our advice may change. Our tests may change as well. And one thing that has happened over the last couple of weeks is there's much more awareness of the local variation in the R rate and the local variations in everything else associated with the pandemic. It will probably be the case that by September there will be much more of a focus on local tests as well as national tests. That doesn't mean we'll step back from the national test by any means, but we may well be thinking more locally as well as nationally by then. And Pippa asked about decolonising in the curriculum. There was a really, really good call on Monday afternoon with Reverend Jesse Jackson Sr. and Dan Abbott and various others, where there was a discussion around decolonising the curriculum. And the point that was made then is don't wait for anybody else to have these discussions. If you want to get on with your discussions in your workplace with your students and with your colleagues, then please do that. Don't wait for the government to give guidelines or even the NEU to give guidelines. We want to learn from you, not tell you how to take that forward.
Okay, Norman?
Yeah, on decolonising, just before the pandemic happened, we were talking to the NUS and we're starting to reach an agreement around precisely that, about decolonising the curriculum and working with them. So that's something that if anybody's interested to contact me, and we can start that conversation going. We do need to remember that there are now two givens now. We don't just have to speculate about what the pandemic will do. We know there's been a 4-month gap now in education, and we know that there's going to be unemployment. So we know these, and it's going to affect particularly young people. So those two things now have to be factored in as extra issues for the sector. So it may be that we should think about not just the 5 tests in terms of health and safety, but 5 tests in terms of education going forward. Because when I look at the issue about contact hours, curriculum, pedagogy, CPD, planning, preparation, assessment, all those things that Jean's talked about, we need to apply those tests now going forward from September. And the sooner we can do that, with a clear voice and a clear message to stakeholders and government, the better place we'll be in the long run.
Thank you. And with regards to the decolonisation, the union, as Norman has said, I've been working on it, and we do hope early next week to launch our framework around that in education and going forward. So hopefully that will be out there, but absolutely begin the conversations and make sure that is. And again, like Jean and Andrew have said, risk assessments are live. They should be checked on with regards to the changing in circumstances, whether that's pupils coming in, whether that's the types of lessons that you're opening up, but absolutely should be checked throughout. Okay, I've got a few more questions to come through. Susie, is there guidance for staff who need to use public transport to get to work? Is this legitimate grounds for requesting to work from home as the college, or is the college obliged to grant this request? So issues of coming in on public transport. Greg has asked, I am personally missing my workplace, but I am unsure as to when I'll be able to head back into my workplace. I have confirmed that I have face masks, hand sanitizers, and will work independently and separately from others, but still no update or confirmation. Is there any update as to when I may be able to head back? Of course, independently, not working with students. I'm assuming, Greg, that you must be in one of the shielding or the vulnerable categories by the way you've outlined that. Martin, can we have some advice on directed time? Colleges are talking about delivering a lot of lessons to small groups while still asking us to deliver content. I'm finding it impossible to work out what can be considered acceptable amount of online working in addition to such a large number of face-to-face sessions. This is because classes have shrunk. And finally, from Noni, can we as Post-16 sector please publicly denounce colleges that are making redundancies in the middle of this pandemic? Andrew, I'll come to you first.
Well, Susie asked specifically about staff travelling to work on public transport. That's one of the areas that we flagged up in our guidance on at-risk staff, because it is an element that can put you at risk, particularly depending on the mode of transport and the number of changes, for example, that might be involved, but also the sheer inability to get to work in plenty of parts of the country. If, for example, your car share is now no longer possible because of distancing, or your colleagues' unwillingness to give you a lift anymore, I suppose. It's legitimate grounds to requesting to work at home. Yes, absolutely. That's what we're saying in the advice. Are they obliged to grant the request? Well, they're not advised by government to concede any of these requests, but we think that in the current climate, at least, nearly all of these requests can be agreed, and if it's necessary to keep you safe, should be agreed. And with regard to Martin and directed time, Martin, I assume you're in a sixth form college because directed time exists in sixth form colleges. If you're being directed, if you're being asked to do something or told to do something of a particular kind in a particular place at a particular time with a particular group, that is directed time. Otherwise, you can do it when you like or not at all, on a Sunday evening perhaps, and with whom you like. So anything that you're doing of that kind will be directed time and should count towards the 1265 hours. And it should be counted as work in the FE sector where there isn't the same concept of directed time in all colleges as well.
Thanks, Andrew. Jean? You need to unlock Jean, please. Hold on a second, she's just muted. I'll come to Norma. Oh, okay, Jean.
Yeah, I'm back. I'm here. Sorry. Yeah, one thing I was thinking about when Andrew was talking about public transport. Of course, a lot of our students come on public transport, and I have to say there's many managements who are acknowledging that at the moment, to the extent that they're not encouraging students to come in, or they're encouraging students to come in by other means than public transport if they possibly can. And I think that, you know, that shows good practice where that happens. On directed time, I think Andrew is absolutely right. Directed time is directed time, and whether you've got 7 students or 24, you're spending that time online teaching, you know, getting that lesson ready. So that's important. And you know, the same would go if we had members of staff teaching small groups. We'll still say that, you know, they're still teaching the same amount of time. So that's really, really important.
Thank you.
Also, just one other thing, because directed time document in my college sort of assumes that things are going to be exactly the same, like just as though things are happening. So it will be a real challenge, I think, for reps.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Norman.
Yeah, I'd like to be absolutely clear on the issue of redundancies. Any college, certainly in the FE sector, should not be making redundancies at this point. There's a clear understanding with the other unions and the AOC that this shouldn't be happening. So any college or any member who is going through that process should contact me or David Powell, who attend the joint meetings. That's an absolute no-no. On the other side about the request to go back to work in some form or another, I understand that as a personal issue. It's obviously something that is very difficult for people in isolation. So obviously you'd need to go through the risk assessments and talk to management, etc. about that. But there's also support networks available. And I just throw out this one at the moment. I came across really good work by Lou Mycroft, who's doing podcasts precisely for FE lecturers and sixth form lecturers who feel isolated and would like to share ideas and experiences, because this is a time to rethink as well.
Thank you, and thank you, Norman. And I just want to kind of add on that, because it's happened across the whole of the education sphere, where we've had people that may well be in vulnerable categories and are wanting to return, or may well not be but wanting to return, and their colleges aren't open yet. So many of them, absolutely, you have to complete risk assessment forms and make sure that the vulnerable members of staff are on those risk assessments, or if you've got staff that have additional requirements, are listed on that risk assessment. And it may well be in some of the situations people have been offered occupational health. That isn't, I want people to see that as not a way of a threat, but if you are offered that, you need to contact your local branch and district so that you can have a conversation with them about how that can be supportive for you if you are one of those members offering that. In our experience in the union, 99% and more occupational health are really positive and help provide a way for you to be in work. But absolutely, if you are in that position, then please do contact your branch and district. You're in a union and you should not be dealing with any of that on your own. Okay, we've got time for a few more questions, so thank you to those. I've got Jerry. Jerry says, in the race to the bottom on pay, FE are the clear winners. We need a proper coordinated approach on pay. What guarantees can you give that FE will go to the top of the agenda? And this is a different take on online learning, because, you know, we're a membership. Mohammed has asked, thanks for the meeting. Is the union discussing with government, or is there any plans to discuss with government to promote more online learning, as there are vast majorities of learnings are online now? Also, is there a rough figure of what percentages of learners are being disadvantaged due to online learning? So we know the figure of 700,000 households don't have the internet, but have we got any union figures or collated anything yet with regards to the impact of disadvantage of online learning? And Tanya, is there any information on how, when and where resits for A-levels will be administered, and how this can be managed if social distancing is still in place? Some really good questions coming in. I'll come to you first, Norman.
I don't know whether to leave the question on the pay headline to Andrew on that one, but it is actually a very serious matter to confront. Even in this circumstance, we have to address this issue of turning around FE pay because the collective bargaining machinery seems to have failed us. I'll let Andrew pick up on that. In regards to the online learning, yeah, we're aware of a lot of reports about the disadvantages of online learning, and this is why we need to have a professional voice around the table, and it's something that I think we should be really keen to develop, because it's another area where practitioners should be able to guide and advise on how the implementation of digital happens. We've really got to, turn the tide on that one. This can't be simply sending people into classrooms. We have to be a part of devising that new technology, because it looks like it will have to be done over the next year or so.
Thank you. I'll come to Andrew, and I'll come to you last, Jean, to summarise everything. Andrew.
Okay, well, I'll just say something on pay, I suppose. I mean, FE, it's absolutely right, has been the clear winner in both the low level of national increases and the fragmentation of the system, which means that so much pay bargaining now either takes place in colleges on an individual college basis, or doesn't really take place at all because it's just imposed by management. This is something that, as a union, we should be able to do something about. We're not the biggest player in the FE sector by any means, but we are a general union. We're representing both support staff and teaching staff. And in the workplace, the union is its members, and the workforce needs to work together and stand together. The union will support members in securing victories at the workplace, and it can be done if members want it to happen. Rebuilding the national machinery to ensure that we've got a national framework which can provide that uplift and uniformity for all is a bit more of an ask with a Conservative government that's elected until 2024, but that's still very much on the horizon as well. But the workplace is the place to start, and we start with you and your colleagues as the members in that workplace.
Thank you. And I'll come to Jean. Thank you.
Yeah, okay, just a couple of things. I know we're really tight for time, so one thing I'd say is on pay, yes, absolutely. I think as Andrew was alluding to, we'd need to work with other unions, and I think that would be really important, but also there's got to be a campaign, and I think it's absolutely right. I mean, with FE colleges, we're talking on average £7,000 less for a teacher who works in FE than a teacher who works in a sixth form college, and usually doing exactly the same job, and that's absolutely wrong, fundamentally morally wrong, and we need that campaign, but we need to engage the membership in that. It can't be a top down, it's got to be a bottom up campaign, and we've got to get organised, and we've got to work with the other unions. On Tanya's question about A levels, we have had consultation, we've been involved in the consultation, and we've got to have the results of that, so we don't know yet when the reset A levels and GCSEs will happen. So that's where we're at. Yeah, so just sort of summing up where we're at. You need to go back into your colleges, I think, and make sure everybody's informed in your colleges. And you need to talk about the 10-point plan and how it applies in our sector, and flag up in particular those issues around free school meals and laptops not applying to our sector, and they absolutely must, because when we talk about engagement in online learning, there are a lot of students who are not engaged, and it will vary from college to college, and it will vary from affluence of those students, and some students are trying to do online learning on phones, some are trying to do it in crowded houses, and it's just not fair, and we need to address those issues. So engage, make sure your rep's on the sixth form network. If you're a rep on here and is in a sixth form college, be on the sixth form network. I believe there's an FE equivalent. I'd quite like to be on it, so please add me to it. You know, we need to communicate, we need to ask advice of each other. These are so fast moving times that we need to keep each other informed. And solidarity with all of you, and please, if you need to get in contact with anybody, just do that. We're here for you.
Thank you. And, you know, I want to echo those words. Firstly, thank you for joining us. I hope that you found this webinar informative and helpful, and please add in your comments as to how we can improve or any areas you think we've not covered. And also, if you found it supportive and helpful, that would be really good for us to know, so that we can develop the way that we do these as we go forward. Exactly what Jean has said, go back and discuss those risk assessments. Make sure, as I said, they're live and they should be reviewed at all times as you have different pupils come in with different needs. And again, if you are in a position in your college where you have a difficulty, do not feel alone. Go to your reps, have conversations with each other. You know, if you don't have a health and safety rep, we still have health and safety rep training that people could go on, so that you could work together as a team in your college to make sure that you're supporting of everybody. We are a trade union and you shouldn't be doing any of this alone. I think Jean talked around the 10-point plan. Have a look, talk to your members, talk to your management about how that could change college and your college, and how you operate, and how, given the circumstances of FE and HE, you don't qualify for those things, and what we can do to push those. I just want to say thank you very much for your time. Thank you for everything that you are doing. It's a difficult time. Many of you haven't returned or are returning. But even if you're not in college, we are aware that you've been doing a huge amount of work, and there is still 5.5 weeks or so to go till the end of term. And we're aware that there will be many, many changes in that time. So please stay in touch. Please contact Jean or Norman should you need to. And always on the back of your membership card is the name of your branch and district secretary or the advice line. So please make sure that you don't do any of this alone, and you contact someone for help. Thank you very much for your time.